Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. Today we're checking out how was England formed?
The existence of England is one that is often taken for granted and looked at far too scarcely. This may be due to the overshadowing history of the development of Great Britain and the United Kingdom.
I can't think that I really know what was going on in England before the Romans. I mean, even then I don't know what was going on there. And I'm sure I learned it in school, but that was a long time ago. I'm hoping they're going to get into stuff that happened before the Romans were there, like maybe what tribes of people were there, where the people came from originally, what was life like back then for them. I bet it was scary. I bet they didn't even speak English back then. I bet English didn't exist. They probably spoke Latin. Y'all, what if they spoke Japanese? How crazy would that be? I don't think that's what we're going to find out. But yeah, how was England formed? And that is usually overshadowed by how Great Britain was formed. I did a reaction to a video about the definition of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, and I still make mistakes, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time for making the mistake of calling England Britain or vice versa. Sorry about that. Please forgive me. I love you all. So yeah, how was England formed?
But nonetheless, in order for these unions to be formed, England had to already exist, and it actually has since 927 AD.
Wow. Yeah, and the shape of England, I almost never see that shape. Like when someone says England, I don't think of that shape. Unification of Angles, Saxons, and Danes. As in Danish? Really? Angles, Saxons, and Danes. July 12th, 927. Angles, Saxons, and Danes. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes? Didn't come from Denmark, but their language was intelligible to that of Danes, and material culture and cult of both groups were nearly identical. Before they went to Britain. Okay, so they weren't Danish, or they weren't from Denmark. They were Jutes, but they sounded like Danes, and everyone else said, they just call them Danes. It is a better word than Jutes. Jutes has a... What is a jute now? Jute. Jute is a long, rough, shiny bast fiber that can be spun into coarse, strong threads. Oh, they're from... Okay. One of the Germanic tribes who settled in Great Britain after the departure of the Romans. They were one of three most powerful Germanic nations along with the Angles and the Saxons. They all came from Germany? Or they were Germanic, not necessarily Germany. From the Jutes are descended the people of Kent and the Isle of Wight. Yeah, it's so close on a map, isn't it? People probably make that trip from Denmark to England every day. But back then, okay, Jutland. So the Jutes were from up here, Denmark. That's why they were basically called Danes. The Jutes, everybody.
So how was England created? Who claimed the land before the English, and how did it become the nation that we know today? As the Roman Empire began to fade from the British Isles, the area of modern-day England started to see a wave of migration from Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes. According to some historians, after the Romans left, the native Britons came under attack from the nearby Picts and Scots, and subsequently welcomed some of these Anglo-Saxons in hopes that they would push out the other invaders. The Germanic peoples were successful in expelling both the Scots and Picts, but they then turned on the native Britons and established their own authority by the start of the 7th century.
What's a Pict? Oh, Picts. Pre-Viking. Looks like they could carve stone. Picts are assumed to have been descendants of the Caledonii and other Iron Age tribes. So they were where Scotland is now. They were good with metal. So the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes came over. The English natives liked that because they were helping push the Picts and the Scots out. But then once they pushed the Picts and the Scots out, the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes started taking control. All is fair in love and war. That's how it goes. Especially back then.
The new Anglo-Saxon rulers then installed the kingdoms of Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex on the British mainland.
Wow! Some of these sound familiar. Some of these are still around now, right? Essex I've definitely heard of. Kent I've heard of. Wessex I've heard of. Northumbria I think I've heard of. What's that bottom one?
Sussex.
Yeah, I've heard of Sussex. So those are all separate kingdoms. This is very Game of Thrones. So all of these separate kingdoms were established by the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. I think he's just saying Anglo-Saxons. He's not including the Jutes or the Danes. I don't know if that's just laziness or if it's accurate.
There are minimal records of what happened over the next few centuries throughout these kingdoms, but we do know that it wouldn't be long before the Anglo-Saxons would face invaders of their own. In 793,
Vikings.
a Viking army landed at the Lindisfarne Monastery and raided the sacred building. Their violence and disrespect stunned the Anglo-Saxons, who were unprepared for what these Vikings had in store.
Really? Their disrespect? What do you mean? I mean, I know Vikings were pretty hardcore, raping and pillaging and all that. The most disturbing thing about Viking raids isn't what you think. The people of Wessex first extended the hand of cautious peace. They sent a local magistrate and the Vikings immediately killed him. That must be what they meant by the disrespect. They were surprised by that. They just killed the messenger. Oh, there were raiding seasons. Oh my gosh. Hit and run affairs. Oh, they enslaved people. Thousands of people could be enslaved in a single raid. That is hardcore. So the Vikings came. The people of Wessex sent out a messenger saying, hey, we're cool, right? The Vikings killed him. Well, that's a no.
By the end of 870, East Anglia fell to the Danish invaders, and Mercia was lost only 4 years later. As the Vikings seized Northumbria next in 875, Wessex was the only...
Vikings were Danish? That, I always thought they were, like, from Norway.
As the Vikings seized Northumbria next in 875, Wessex was the only remaining major kingdom under Anglo-Saxon authority. When the current king of Wessex, Ethelred, died, his younger brother Alfred was left to protect his kingdom's independence. At first, he did so by paying off the Viking aggressors, until he was eventually prepared to lead an army against them. This culminated in the Battle of Edington, which left the Danes utterly routed and ended their attempts to capture Wessex.
Okay, so he's using the term Danes and Vikings interchangeably, I think, which is confusing. Because the Danes are also the Jutes, or maybe the Jutes and the Danes and the Vikings were... I'm confused. Let's let it play out. Let's avoid and see if it makes sense.
This culminated in the Battle of Edington, which left the Danes utterly routed and ended their attempts to capture Wessex. A power vacuum in Mercia around the same time resulted in King Alfred also gaining control of the kingdom, and instead of establishing a new monarch, he placed an alderman in charge. This nobleman would answer to King Alfred himself and kept the King of Wessex as the ultimate authority throughout both regions, although a part of Mercia would be ceded to the Vikings.
So Alfred was the king of Wessex. He drove back the Vikings/Danes out of parts of Mercia, and then he installed his buddy to rule Mercia. But his buddy still had to report to him.
After the death of the King of Wessex and the contemporary leader of Mercia in 911, Edward the Elder and Ethelfled each became their respective successors. Together,
Ethelfled?
These new rulers began to increase the pressure that had already been put on the neighboring Danelaw.
I'm naming my next dog Ethelfled.
In 917, Ethelfled expanded her lands to the north, and Edward was able to incorporate all of East Anglia into his kingdom. As Ethelfled pushed forward with the expansion,
okay, hang on. It looks like he got London through that. Oh, wait, okay. So this is London right here, down here, right? So the Thames goes like that. So it looks like North London was Viking territory and Southern London was Wessex territory, or Anglo-Saxon territory. Interesting.
As Ethelfled pushed forward with the expansion, she managed to extend Mercian territory all the way up to York, where the locals decided it would be best to simply pledge loyalty to her as opposed to fighting. Although Ethelfled shortly died, her daughter, Elfwin, was supposed to...
Ethelfled's a woman? Hang on, I gotta look up Ethelfled. Ethelfled and Ethelred. Ethelfled. Good work.
Although Ethelfred shortly died, her daughter, Elfwin, was supposed to take her place and continue on the current course. Unexpectedly, though, the Mercian people quickly ousted their new leader and accidentally created the perfect opportunity for King Edward from
Why?
Wessex to seize all of Mercia not long after.
Why did they oust her? Why did they kick her out? It doesn't say. They just say the king decided to remove her and no one protested. Everyone was cool with it. Why? I'm going to ChatGPT. Why was AL when removed? No. Nope. AL when was a real person. Okay. Oh, okay. So ChatGPT is saying that it was probably political and it was done so that the king could assert control over the area she was controlling. I thought Edward the Elder already had control. Anyway, no clear answer. I don't trust ChatGPT.
In 918, the Anglo-Saxons continued farther into Danelaw territory and slowly gained more and more land for themselves. By the time of Edward's death in 924, the newly acquired neighbors of the Anglo-Saxons had all pledged allegiance to the king. This put the Anglo-Saxons in a confident position as Edward's son, Aethelstan, took over the kingdom.
So the people who were living in Scotland and the north area at the time pledged allegiance to the English king, and it looks like that made it really tough for the Vikings in Northumbria. Wow, York is on the map back then. What was it called? Jorvik. And that became York over the years. That's crazy.
Around this time, Etheltan's sister would marry the local Viking ruler Sihtric, who still controlled Northumbria. Aethelstan marched on and was finally able to bring the kingdom of York under his crown as his sister's husband passed away. This left Northumbria up for grabs, and the king swiftly consolidated it as part of his kingdom.
That's some Game of Thrones stuff right there. So his sister married the Northumbrian ruler, and when he died, he just took it over. Smart. I mean, he has the army. All's fair in love and war.
This is generally the time that most historians view the Kingdom of England as having been created. But the situation was not exactly so simple. Aethelstan was not done trying to expand his kingdom however he could, and although he did term himself the King of the English at this point, it was still not quite what we know as England today. Aethelstan decided to give an invasion of Scotland a chance to see if he could reach his authority even further.
He got greedy. He couldn't just live with getting the Vikings out. He had to keep going. These are the kind of people that have gambling addictions.
The Kingdom of Scotland, or as it was known at the time, Alaba, was at a disadvantage against the English, and therefore appealed to the other remaining sovereign states for assistance. This prompted an alliance between Constantine II, King of Alaba, Olaf Guthfreyson, King of Dublin, and Owain, King of Strathclyde. With King Olaf at the helm, the alliance faced the English at the spectacular Battle of Brunanburh.
This is getting messy. What was the yellow part called again? I've never heard of that before. What?
And Owain, King of Strathclyde. With
Strathclyde. Wow. And Dublin, now a city, used to be a kingdom. Strathclyde. I just want to see what comes up if I type in Strathclyde. Oh. So Glasgow is in Strathclyde, and there's a University of Strathclyde. River of Clyde. Strathclyde! It's only been 1,000 years since all this happened. That's a long time, but man, how the world has changed.
With King Olaf at the helm, the alliance faced the English at the spectacular Battle of Brunanburh. Though it is unknown exactly where this battle took place, it is certain that the alliance was severely crushed by the English invaders. The casualties on both sides was disastrously high, but Aethelstan and the English were without a doubt the victors.
In a way that makes sense that would happen, because the English had been fighting the Vikings for so long. Yeah, the Kingdom of Strathclyde and Alaba and Dublin, were they fighting the Vikings? Surely they did. I'm gonna look it up. Strathclyde held to its alliance with the Vikings? Wait a minute. They could have been allies at one time and then not another time. That's just how it goes. It's messy.
Believed by many that this clash may have truly solidified the unity of England and stirred up a new sense of nationalism and pride amongst the English people. Nonetheless, it didn't result in the incorporation of Alba nor Strathclyde into the Kingdom of England, as both stayed independent. England, on the other hand, would have to prove its ability to do so.
England fought off those three kingdoms, the allies, and they didn't take over their kingdoms. They just did enough to say, hey, chill out. You stay over there.
The Vikings, though temporarily defeated, would return to the young kingdom at the end of the 10th century. After Ethelstan's death in 939, the previously defeated King of Dublin, who was a Viking ruler, took immediate advantage of England's temporary instability.
Olaf Guthfrithson? Guthfrithson. Olaf Guthfrithson. Olaf Guthfrithson. He was a Viking, son of Gofraid Ual... I'm not even going to try to say it. King of Dublin. Olaf left for York, where he was quickly able to establish himself as king. Oh, I'm reading ahead of the video. Olaf's about to stir some shit up.
While King Ethelstan's brother Edmund took over the English realm, King Olaf swooped in to reconquer some of the lands that had once been in Viking hands. York was quickly captured, and a large chunk of what used to be Northumbria and Mercia was also taken, as he strong-armed the English into accepting this annexation. Ironically, when Olaf died in 941 and his cousin, who shared the same name, was transitioning to the throne as his successor, Edmund of England jumped on the chance to pay the Vikings back for the invasion. The following year, the middle chunk of annexed land was retaken by the English, and in only 2 more years, the Vikings were entirely pushed out of Northumbria.
That's a lot of fighting, y'all. A lot of fighting. It was only 1,000 years ago. That's not long enough for our dumb human brains to evolve away from wanting to kill each other. That mindset is no longer useful. Let's evolve, y'all. Let's move past that. This history is great. Let's not keep doing it. That's why we learn from history, right? So we don't have to do this kind of stuff anymore. It's not about land. It's not about material stuff, right? Anyway.
This essentially reunited England, since the territory was now all under Edmund's control. As ambitious as his ancestors, Edmund next invaded Strathclyde, but only took some of its southern territories by the end of the incursion. The rest was given to King Malcolm I of Scotland, as opposed to joining England. It once again appeared as though the Kingdom of England had established some stability.
That Strathclyde border... Is that a natural border, or is that just the graphic? Looks like there's a highway along the border now, for some of it. Okay, I guess that's mostly the graphic they're using that just looks like that.
Edmund was mysteriously murdered in 946, which left his younger brother, Edred, as King of England. The next year, Eric Bloodaxe from Norway attacked and seized the recently reincorporated
Eric Bloodaxe?
The next year, Eric Bloodaxe from Norway attacked and seized the recently reincorporated Northumbria, which prompted almost a decade of conflicts over who, throughout the Isles, would lead Northumbria. Eventually, the English king was able to once again and permanently reclaim the territory on behalf of England. His death soon ended his reign after this victory, and his young nephew Edwig temporarily succeeded him, but was quickly deposed in favor of his brother Edgar. However, this was only a partial deposition, which meant that Edwig would still hold a small section of the kingdom as a co-ruler. When Edwig died, only
Bad idea. That never works out. As we've seen. Did Edwig not have what it takes? Oh. Their father was killed trying to rescue his seneschal from attack. What is that? What's a seneschal? Dishbearer. His dishbearer was being mugged, and so the king tried to save him, and he was killed. Oh, he was only 15 years old. He clashed with some religious leaders. He later came to be seen as an enemy of monasteries. He probably just had a strong personality, maybe some opinions about religion.
When Edwig died only 2 years after this decision, Edgar simply took over the whole of England. Under the reign of King Edgar, Known as Edgar the Peaceful, the true foundations of the English kingdom could finally be established. Many reforms were passed, and a vast number of the systems and laws that had existed in the Dane law were actually upheld in hopes of avoiding any displeasure from the Danish portion of the population.
Like what? Like what? There were no Viking invasions during his reign. I'm getting into the charters here. 4 law codes. The Andover Code, church dues. For the first time, a specific penalty was prescribed for non-payment of tithes. So you had to pay the church. Anyone who did not pay to the Pope had to take it to Rome. Judgments had to be just and punishments had to be appropriate. We're getting somewhere. He reformed the coinage. Okay. He did some stuff that people liked.
Peace, unity, and order were the pillars of Edgar's nearly 2-decade-long reign, and his work helps to fully solidify the unity of the young Kingdom of England. The ultimate foundation of England was a long and shaky process, from the initial immigration of the Anglo-Saxons into the region to the establishment of their first kingdoms, extending into the invasion and rule of the Vikings. It wasn't until the Anglo-Saxons began to seize territory from the Danelaw that an inkling of modern-day England could be seen.
So was York the capital back then? It was.
After a series of conquering, being conquered, reconquering, and so on, the Anglo-Saxons eventually united the existing kingdoms throughout England. From there, it was merely a matter of establishing solid borders, maintaining their captured territory in order to keep their kingdom physically solid, and eventually, under the rule of Edgar the Peaceful, building the foundational laws and structures of what we know now as the Kingdom or Nation of England.
Wow, so England would probably not exist as we know it if the Vikings had not invaded. So before the Vikings invaded, it was those several different kingdoms, and it was smaller, physically smaller. When the Vikings came, tried to take over, they united behind a common enemy. Those kingdoms fought back. Wessex, I guess, was the main one, right? They let the Vikings conquer everything, and then they conquered the Vikings and took all of that. Those olden days when it was just those kingdoms must have been wild. No rules? That's not true. Different rules. Such a crazy... I can't imagine living in a time, especially in that northern part of England, where the Vikings would come, then they'd get pushed away, then the Vikings would come again, and then they'd get pushed away. So much fighting and horrible brutality must have gone on. It's hard to imagine. Living in fear of a Viking invasion? My gosh. Fascinating video. Thank y'all for recommending. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Later.